The call came in the middle of the night at exactly 3 a.m. In Mallorca, a time when even someone like Rafael Nadal, a player long accustomed to the demanding and global rhythms of professional tennis, would normally expect nothing but complete silence. He picked up the phone anyway. At first, he assumed it was something routine. Perhaps some news from the Rafa Nadal Academy, an update about one of the young players he mentors, or maybe a logistical issue that simply could not wait until morning. But what he heard instead instantly cut through the quiet of the night. The voice on the other end of the line was not calm at all. It was urgent, strained, and borderline panicked. The Upper Austria Ladies Linz Open, a tournament with over 35 years of proud history, was in serious trouble. It was not a minor problem, it was a full-blown crisis. Ticket sales, which the organizers had confidently projected and counted on many months in advance, had suddenly and dramatically collapsed. Entire sections of the arena remained completely unsold. Sponsors, who had always been steady and predictable partners in the past, were now becoming restless. They were openly questioning their commitments and even hinting that they might withdraw their support entirely. And the reason for all of this chaos was shockingly simple. Eala was not in the main draw. The 20-year-old Filipina tennis player, whose incredible rise had electrified tournaments across many continents, had been left out of the main draw after her ranking slipped from number 29 to number 45. This drop happened following her loss to Karolina Muchova at the Miami Open. On paper, according to the standard ranking rules, her exclusion made perfect sense. But in reality, it changed everything. Because this was not just another player missing from the lineup. This was the player whose presence had overwhelmed crowds in Melbourne. This was the same player whose matches had driven massive surges in ticket sales in Dubai. This was the same player whose jerseys had sold out within hours in Miami. Without her in the draw, the entire energy of the tournament simply vanished. Sponsors noticed the problem immediately. These were the same brands that had watched her merchandise outperform all expectations. They had seen her face dominate social media platforms everywhere. They understood, perhaps better than the official rankings ever could, what her real value was to the sport. And now they were sending a very clear, direct, and uncomfortable message. Give her a wild card or prepare to lose millions of dollars in revenue. By the time the full situation had been explained to him in detail, Rafael Nadal was no longer lying down in bed. He had sat upright, fully awake now, carefully absorbing the enormous scale of what he was hearing. Because this was not simply about one tournament struggling to sell tickets. This was something much deeper. It was a direct collision between long-standing tennis tradition and a new kind of transformation sweeping through the sport. A collision between a system built strictly on rankings and a new reality driven by global fan attention, emotional connection, and massive cultural impact. And when he finally heard what the organizers of the tournament and possibly even officials from the Women's Tennis Association, WTA, were seriously considering as their next step, even Nadal, the undisputed king of clay, and a man who has witnessed nearly everything this sport can offer, was genuinely stunned. April 2026, Linz, Austria. The Upper Austria Ladies Linz Open was supposed to be a grand celebration. It was the 35th edition of the tournament, a milestone that few events in tennis ever reach. The event promised a full week of high-level tennis, bright lights, exciting matches, and packed stands filled with enthusiastic fans. Big names from the past and present, including players like Katerina Alexandrova and Jelena Ostapenko, were lined up to headline the tournament. The prize money had been significantly increased by more than $140,000 compared to the previous year, which clearly signaled both growth and strong ambition from the organizers. On the surface, everything seemed perfectly ready for a successful and memorable week. Then the actual numbers started coming in, and the planned celebration quickly turned into panic. The pre-sale reports were devastating. Attendance projections that had been built on decades of steady and reliable growth had completely collapsed. Ticket sales were down by more than 40% when compared to the previous year. Sessions that had always sold out in the past, including the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and even the final, were now barely half full. A major financial loss was now looming large over the entire tournament, a loss so serious that it threatened the very future and survival of the event. Everyone in the organizing room knew the cause without needing to say it out loud. It was the Eala effect, the powerful force that had previously crashed ticketing systems at the Miami Open and created a dramatic 48% surge in ticket sales in Dubai. That same force was now nowhere to be found in Linz. Eala, the 2-0-year-old Filipina star who had become the most magnetic and exciting player in women's tennis, was completely absent from the main draw. Her ranking had dropped from number 29 all the way down to number 45 after her fourth-round loss to Karolina Muchova at the Miami Open. Without her competing, the fans who had traveled from continents away from places as far as Melbourne to Miami simply did not show up at all. For the organizers, the irony of the situation was particularly sharp and painful. They had spent the last 35 years carefully cultivating strong relationships with local sponsors and media partners. They had invested heavily in marketing campaigns, in player development programs, and in upgrading their facilities. They had worked hard to build a tournament that was dependable, highly professional, and widely respected across the tennis world. And yet, despite all of that long-term effort and investment, none of it seemed to matter anymore when the draw was missing Eala. Because in women's tennis in 2026, the cold numbers on a ranking list could no longer compete with the incredible pull of a true phenomenon. Eala was not just another tennis player. She had become a full movement. And the Linz Open had just learned, in the hardest possible way, exactly what it felt like to run a tournament without that movement. Nothing else mattered in the end. The fans had not come for the tournament itself. They had come specifically for Eala, and when she was not there, they simply stayed home. The sponsor meeting had originally been scheduled as nothing more than a routine check-in, a standard review of the tournament's current finances, and a discussion about plans for the following year. It was supposed to follow the usual corporate rhythm of a typical WTA event, but as soon as the latest ticket sales numbers were revealed to the group, the entire atmosphere in the room changed completely. These sponsors had been closely following the Eala phenomenon for many months already. They had personally witnessed the 48% surge in ticket sales in Dubai when she was in the draw. They had watched in amazement as the Miami Open's ticketing system almost buckled under the enormous weight of thousands of passionate Filipino fans. They had carefully studied the merchandise reports that showed Eala's jerseys outselling every other player in the entire field combined. The calculation for them was now very simple and straightforward. Eala directly equals revenue. The Linz tournament, with its relatively modest ticket sales and older fan base, was suddenly failing to deliver the kind of financial return that these sponsors had come to expect. Voices in the meeting became sharper. Questions quickly turned into strong demands that required immediate answers. When the tournament officials tried to explain that Eala's ranking had dropped and that she was therefore excluded from the main draw according to standard rules, the reaction from the sponsors was instant and uncompromising. "Get her in," one sponsor snapped. "We don't care how you do it. Give her a wild card, a special exemption, whatever it takes. If she is not playing, then we are not paying." This ultimatum sent immediate shockwaves throughout the entire tournament organization. For the first time in its entire 5-year history, the Linz Open was no longer simply focused on planning and running tennis matches. Instead, it was now desperately scrambling to navigate a major crisis, a crisis that was entirely of its own making. It was a crisis that no spreadsheet, no marketing plan, and no amount of years of experience had ever prepared them for. Because this situation was not really about basic logistics. It was not even primarily about the prize money. At its core, it was about one single player who had grown so big that she had become larger than the sport's traditional systems themselves. The WTA rules on this matter were very clear and unambiguous. Wild cards are granted at the complete discretion of the tournament organizers, but they have traditionally been reserved for local hopefuls or for promising rising stars who have not yet qualified through their ranking position. Under normal circumstances, a player ranked number 45 like Eala would have been considered ineligible for a wild card. But these circumstances were far, far from normal. The Linz Open was now facing a looming financial disaster. Sponsors were actively threatening to pull out their support completely. Ticket sales had already plummeted dramatically. And the only player who seemed capable of filling the stands, reigniting the excitement, and restoring the energy that the tournament had always relied upon, was being blocked by a rigid ranking system that completely failed to recognize or measure her true value to the sport. Inside the offices of the WTA, the internal discussions were reportedly very tense and at times even heated. Some officials strongly insisted that the rules must be upheld strictly with no exceptions allowed. Other officials pushed back, arguing that the rules were created to serve the sport, and if those same rules were now actively preventing the sport from growing and thriving, then it was time to seriously reconsider and update them. After all, rankings were designed to measure on-court performance, but they could never fully capture a player's influence, her charisma, or her unique ability to bring fans together from around the world. One anonymous source inside the WTA captured the feeling perfectly when they said, "Alex is not just a tennis player, she is a phenomenon. And if the rules are standing in the way of the sport thriving, then maybe the rules need to catch up with reality." This intense debate inside the WTA clearly highlighted a much larger tension that now exists in modern tennis, the ongoing collision between strict traditional structure and the growing power of pure spectacle, between rigid regulation and undeniable cultural impact. For the WTA, this situation had quickly grown beyond being just a simple decision for one tournament. It had become a serious test of the organization's relevance in a rapidly changing world, where a single player could now command massive global attention that went far beyond traditional rankings or old metrics. And right at the center of that storm, Eala's name had become the one factor that could either save the Linz Open or completely reshape its future. Eala had already proven something that was now undeniable. She had the power to fill entire stadiums, to sell out huge amounts of merchandise, and to bring thousands of brand new fans into the sport of tennis. That kind of real influence carried enormous value, and the WTA now needed to find a practical way to officially recognize and accommodate it, whether through special wildcards, strategic adjustments to scheduling and seeding, or even a deeper reconsideration of how the ranking system should measure a player's true overall impact on the game. When the final decision was eventually made, it was truly unprecedented in the history of the WTA. The organization officially announced that Eala would receive a wild card into the main draw of the Linz Open. In their public statement, they cited the extraordinary circumstances surrounding the tournament and openly acknowledged the significant contributions that Eala had already made to the growth and popularity of women's tennis worldwide. The public reaction to this announcement was immediate and strongly polarized. Many critics accused the WTA of unfairly bending and breaking its own established rules just to accommodate one player who had not earned her spot through ranking points. On the other hand, many others recognized and defended the decision as a necessary and positive evolution, a clear acknowledgement that both the sport and the way it connects with modern fans were changing rapidly. The so-called Eala effect had already been a frequent topic of conversation in tennis circles for many months. But the crisis at the Linz Open pushed this discussion into completely new and uncharted territory. The big question that everyone in the tennis world was now asking was this: why was the presence of one single player so incredibly crucial to a tournament's financial survival? The answer came down to one powerful word: connection. For the huge Filipino diaspora spread across the world, Eala is far more than just a talented tennis player. She has become a living symbol of possibility and hope. She is a young woman from Manila who rose up through limited opportunities to now stand proudly on the world's biggest and most prestigious tennis stages, visible, celebrated, and seemingly unstoppable. She perfectly embodies the overseas Filipino worker, OFW dream, the powerful idea that through sacrifice, relentless hard work and effort, and unbreakable belief, something truly extraordinary can be achieved. Whenever players like Eala arrive from countries such as the Philippines, where opportunities in professional tennis have historically been very limited, stadiums do not simply fill up with spectators. Instead, they completely transform into something much more emotional and meaningful. Every single cheer is amplified with deep national pride. Every banner and every jersey carries a personal story behind it. Every fan present serves as a living reminder that representation truly matters in sport. Eala does not just play tennis matches. She actively bridges entire continents, different cultures, and diverse communities together through her presence and her performances. In Linz, that important bridge was about to be reopened once again, and the stadium was ready to experience the same powerful feeling that millions of fans around the world already knew so well. Her presence on the court is far more than just a game. It is inspiration in motion. As one veteran referee observed earlier in the year at a Davis Cup venue, people are not just cheering for one player, they are cheering for their country. That deep emotional connection translates directly into real economic activity for tournaments. In Dubai, ticket sales jumped by a full 48% the moment Eala was confirmed in the draw. In Miami, her official jerseys outsold the merchandise of every other player in the entire field combined. In Linz, her absence had pushed the tournament toward a potential financial disaster. The numbers were now impossible to ignore or deny. Alex Eala's presence at any tournament consistently generated millions of dollars in extra ticket revenue, merchandise sales, and valuable media exposure. Her absence, on the other hand, was now clearly costing tournaments millions in lost income. The WTA, which had spent many years actively trying to find ways to grow the game globally, had finally discovered a player who could actually deliver that kind of explosive growth. And yet, they still had no clear idea how to properly handle or manage this new reality. For Alex Eala herself, receiving the wild card into the Linz Open meant much more than simply gaining entry into one more tournament. It was a powerful form of validation. It served as clear proof that her true value to the sport could not be measured or limited by ranking points alone. Her ranking had dropped from number 29 down to number 45 after the 390 ranking points she had earned from her magical 2025 semifinal run finally expired. The clay court season now stretched out in front of her Linz, Stuttgart, Madrid, Rome, and ultimately Roland Garros. The challenges ahead were very real. Clay courts demand slower conditions, higher bounces, much longer rallies, and a completely different level of patience and tactical awareness that hard courts simply do not require. But Alex Eala possesses something that no official ranking list will ever be able to measure or capture. She has the unwavering love and support of an entire nation that is ready and willing to follow her anywhere in the world she plays. In Linz, she will compete as the number 7 seed, positioned behind more established players such as Katerina Alexandrova, Ons Jabeur, or Tulsin if that was intended, Aryna Sabalenka or Samonova if Tipo, Yelena Ostapenko, Emma Navarro, and Emma Raducanu. She will face opponents who possess significantly more experience on clay surfaces, players who have already won major titles on this surface and who feel they have nothing left to prove. Yet she will also bring something to the tournament that none of those opponents have: the passionate and loud support of thousands of Filipino fans who have traveled all the way to Austria specifically to watch her compete in person. I could win the whole thing or I could lose in the first match, Alex Eala said during a recent podcast interview with former world number 1 Andy Roddick. If I don't get the win here, I'll get it somewhere else. Those words reflect the mindset of a true champion in the making, and with the wild card now secured in her hand, she has been given a real chance to go out and prove exactly that on the court. The Linz Open had been standing on the very brink of a serious financial disaster. Ticket sales had completely collapsed. Sponsors were threatening to withdraw their support. And according to the tournament officials themselves, the reason was simple and straightforward. Alex Eala was not playing. The 20-year-old Filipina had dropped from world number 29 to number 45 inches, the rankings, after suffering a crushing loss to Karolina Muchova at the Miami Open. Without her name appearing in the draw, the passionate fans who had packed stadiums from Melbourne all the way to Miami simply chose not to come. The tournament now faced a financial loss so large that it could potentially threaten its long-term future. Then the sponsors stepped forward with an unprecedented demand. They insisted that the WTA must give Alex Eala a wild card into the main draw. Their message was loud and unmistakable: get her in or we are out. Facing this growing crisis of its own making, the WTA eventually relented and granted the wild card. RAFAEL Nadal, who has personally trained and mentored Alex Eala at his academy for the past 7 years, watched the entire dramatic situation unfold from his home in Mallorca. I have never seen a tournament's financial viability depend so heavily on a single player who is not even in the draw, he remarked. This is completely unprecedented. Now, as Alex Eala prepares to take on the full clay court season starting with Linz, followed by Stuttgart, Madrid, Rome, and then the biggest challenge of all, at Roland Garros, she carries with her something that no ranking points or statistics will ever be able to measure. She carries the deep knowledge that her real value to the sport cannot be captured by numbers alone. The so-called Czech curse on clay may still remain unbroken for now. Her overall record on the surface is still relatively modest. But she possesses something far more powerful than any statistic could ever show: the unbreakable love and support of a nation that will not be silenced. The big question that remains is this: was the WTA right to give Alex Eala the wild card?